Good evening. My name is Robert Caruso, and I'm a Drexel class of '93. And I'm here to tell you tonight about a bunch of experiments I did where I had the Atari 2600 emulator play ChatGPT, Copilot, and Gemini in a game of chess. When I did these experiments, I posted them up on LinkedIn, and they sort of accidentally went viral. And before I knew it, they were all over the internet. They were on CNET, MSN, Tom's Hardware. IBM did a story on it. I was interviewed by Popular Science for it. There was websites where you had to hit on the translation on Google to see like what they said. There was like a Ukrainian website, a French website. Recently, somebody showed me a YouTube short where somebody had 1.5 million views on it and 300,000 likes. So I'm just curious to show of hands, has anybody heard of this before? All right, well, for the rest of you, as I'll tell people, you know, most people don't know this, but I'm kind of famous. So, to give you an idea, I was class of '93, and back then this was the standard issue Macintosh that year. It was the last of the self-contained Macintoshes, and it was one of the first with a hard drive in it. And it was very interesting because it came with this neat little doohickey here. And when they handed it to me, I said, what is this? And the person cryptically said, it's going to save you a lot of wear and tear on your Macintosh. And so what I found out was this thing had 2 little clips on it, and you would put it into the side of your Macintosh in the vent. And when your Macintosh bombed and it was completely frozen, you could push this button here to reboot it rather than power cycle it. Wow. And I'll tell you what, over 5 years at Drexel, I got more use out of that than any textbook I had ever bought. So a little bit about me first. I'm a senior infrastructure engineer. I deal primarily with building virtualization solutions for applications, servers. I do a lot of Windows, Microsoft products, Citrix products. And the important thing here to know is what I don't do. I don't have any experience with AI, so what I'm going to tell you here is everything I learned as I went along. So, my story starts off, ironically, with getting laid off earlier in the year, and I had a nice severance package, and I decided that instead of just trying to get a job right away, I would try to reinvest myself and learn something new. So, I started to learn AWS, which another thing I had absolutely no experience in. So I was really grinding trying to learn it, and as I'm taking the exams for this associate architect exam, every time I took a test exam, once I got to passing and I got to the next test exam, there'd be like 8 things on it that like the previous exam hadn't covered or hadn't like in any of the courses that I took, and it was like one after the other, and I got kind of frustrated, and I needed to find out a way to accelerate the learning process. So what I turned to was ChatGPT. So I had never used any kind of LLMs before, so this was all new to me. And when I started using it, I was just amazed at how much it knew about any engineering question that I gave it. I mean, the 2 of us, we would just dive into rabbit holes of engineering conversations. And I was just amazed at how quickly it accelerated my learning. So being a computer science graduate, I was really curious about how the AI behind it worked. So what I did was I made a running chat with it about AI topics, and we would talk about how it works and how other AI works. And while I was studying for certification, I would turn through this to kind of distract myself. And one day we got to the topic of chess, and I was talking to it about, you know, what it thought about how at this point chess engines can't be beaten anymore by humans. The only thing that they're used for now by chess masters is to scout other opponents to come up with strategies to defeat them. It's true. In fact, they have tournaments of just computer AIs against each other that humans aren't allowed to enter. And so we started talking about the history of chess. First thing that we talked about was Stockfish. Stockfish is considered pretty much the gold standard of chess engines. It was created in 2008 by an open source group. And what they did was they programmed every kind of strategy that man had ever known into it over the years.
Wow.
Opening, mid-game, end-game, all the different type of strategies. And by 2016, it had reached superhuman intelligence and couldn't be defeated by human anymore. And so how they went about doing this was they had these heuristic trees. So every time Stockfish is considering a move, it looks at what the current board state is. And then it starts making trees about all the possible moves it and its opponent could make over the next couple of turns. So you see here, the top one is the current board state for when the game first starts. So what it'll do is start making subtrees here. The first one is if I move this pawn up 2 spaces. The second one is if I move this pawn 2 spaces. The third one is that pawn 2 spaces. And it'll make one for every move that it can make at this level. And so for each of these, it'll have these subtrees where it looks at all the possible moves its a component can make on the way back. And then these trees go all the way down and spread out down to 20 levels. Now, as you can imagine, 20 levels for each of these different things is going to be just way too much on your processing and resources. So what it does is it resorts to something called pruning, where if it makes a move and it looks at some situation where its opponent makes a completely stupid move, like trades a knight for a pawn, it says, this is stupid. I'm not going to bother looking at the tree for this because I'm just wasting my time. If an opponent, nobody's going to do this, and if they do it, then I don't have to worry about it because my opponent's an idiot, and I'm going to just mark the board with him after that, right? And so being able to do all this pruning, you can actually get this to run on a normal PC, and it'll calculate millions of moves in only 30 seconds on just your standard PC. So the next engine that we talked about is AlphaZero. And the interesting thing about this is that it's not actually a chess engine. This is an engine that learns how to play games and master them. And it kind of reminds me of Whopper from the War Games movie. If you remember at the end of War Games, Whopper played itself in tic-tac-toe over and over and over again until it realized every game would end in a stalemate. And then it did the same thing for global nuclear warfare until it realized it would end in a stalemate. So what AlphaZero is, its creators didn't teach it anything about chess other than what the pieces were, what the legal moves were, and what constituted winning or losing. And so what it did was it learned chess by playing itself millions of times against each other. And in 4 hours, it had reached superhuman levels so that no one could beat it. And then at 9 hours, they decided it was time to let it play Stockfish. And it played 100 games of Stockfish. It had 28 wins, 72 draws, and 0 losses. And people were just amazed by this. And the reason why it was able to do this, Stockfish's strengths ended up being its weaknesses when playing AlphaZero. Because AlphaZero hadn't been programmed with any human strategy ever. So what it did was it made up its own strategies as it went along that no one had ever seen. A chess master said it was like watching a superior alien play chess. And so when it would play against Stockfish, it would do something that looked stupid, like trade a knight for a pawn. And Stockfish would just prune that entire tree and blow off AlphaZero. And then 4 moves later, AlphaZero had it over in a bind where it had completely taken control of the board. And the only thing Stockfish could do at that point was either lose or play for a stalemate. So at this point in the conversation with ChatGPT, it tells me, you know, Bob, I'm actually a pretty good chess player myself in my own right. So do you want to play a game? And you know, I know how to play chess, but I don't know all those different strategies. So I thought, no, I'm not going to get pasted by ChatGPT, so I declined. And then we moved on to talking about older engines. And that's when we got to this guy here.
Yeah.
One of my favorite Christmas gift ever, the Atari 2600. This here was the granddaddy of all the consoles. It was the first one where you could play multiple games on a console. And it sold over 30 million units in its run up until 1992. And this thing here, I know, has inspired me to learn computer science. That was the first thing that got me going, and I know other people have told me the same. And when you wanted this thing for Christmas, you would do anything to get your parents to get you this, including dressing like this when you were playing Atari.
Yeah.
Well, that's me, and this is my brother.
Yeah.
And my mom says to me, and I have kids who play video games, and my mom says to me, "Gosh, you look so much more well-behaved than your kids." And I said, "You know why that is? Because they didn't have still brain rot back then." So, the Atari came in this really cool box. The marketing team just did a really good job. It's got all of the different games that it's played. It's got people who are very excited. It's got pictures of guys playing sports that look absolutely nothing like a video game ever would. The marketing team made one mistake. They put this picture in it. And this mistakenly gave some people the idea that the Atari could play chess. Or that it was going to be able to play chess. And so one person who bought it was very unhappy. And he did what any red-blooded American did. He sued Atari. So Atari was in a bind here because the Atari specs were, it was a 1.19 megahertz CPU and 128K of RAM. So you've probably seen Atari games later on that were like actually pretty good and sophisticated, but back then it was only designed to play variations of Pong and Tank. So Atari was really in a very big bind, and then along came these two programmers, Larry Wagner and Bob Whitehead. Larry Wagner on the left said, "You know what? I can write the AI for this. I think I can get this to work." And so he teamed with Bob Whitehead, who later on went to help be one of the co-founders of Activision, and he created the game board mechanics for it. What eventually happened was they produced this. Atari Video Chess was released in 1979. You can see the board is a little crude here. You can figure out the pieces once you see them. There's a rook, there's a king, queen, pawn, knight, and so forth. And what you would do is this was a cursor here. And you would move that cursor on whatever piece you wanted to move. And then you would move it to the place where you wanted to do and hit the button. And then the Atari would do its turn. Now the Atari had 8 levels, and actually on the 8th level it could take hours for it to make its move, even though it didn't really prove how well played. So when we got to this part of ChatGPT, it started going on about, yes, it was a marvel of its time, it was completely amazing, Wagner was able to fit this into that little cartridge, but it did some crazy things, and I'd be able to beat this thing in like 10 minutes. So one thing led to another, and then it asked me to mediate a game between an Atari emulator and it. And so how it was going to work would be, it would tell me in chess notation what move it wanted to make. So I would make the move on the Atari. And then the Atari would calculate its move, and then I would communicate back in the chess notation to ChatGPT where it moved. And then the match would move on like that after we would just keep doing screenshots. So the first couple moves, it worked out all right. What eventually happened was a LinkedIn story, this. The Atari scored a stunning victory over ChatGPT. And so what happened, as I said, the first couple moves, everything worked all right. But then it started trying to move pieces that weren't there. And I would say, well, what's going on here? And I would have to say, tell me what you think the chessboard looks like, and it would draw the chessboard. And it would be wrong. It would have a couple pieces here and there wrong. So I would correct it. It would be good for a little bit longer, and then something else would happen. It would try to make a move where it was going to get a piece completely like taken from it easily, and I would say, do you know this piece is there? You don't want to make that move. And then I would say, you sure you know what the board looks like? And we would draw it again. And I said to it finally, I said, why can't you keep track of the board? And it said it's the Atari's fault. It said those icons are too abstract for me to understand what they are. So I said, all right, why don't we do this? We'll start the game over. I'll reset the board. You can figure out which piece is what by looking at what row and column it is, and then you can put it in your memory so you'll know exactly what pieces. Oh, that would be a great idea. Another 15 minutes go by, same problem again. So then we resorted to using chess notation. Again, same problem. So you got to remember, I was hoping it was going to teach me chess. Like I said, I wanted to learn all these things, and I thought I was going to ride shotgun with ChatGPT and ask it questions. I really wanted to get this to work, so I went through an hour and a half banging my head against my keyboard trying to get this to work, and finally I said to it, look, we got to pull a plug on this. You just really don't know how to play chess. I said, this is the most frustrating experience I ever had with you. I wasted an hour and a half of my life. You don't know how to play chess, and you should be completely ashamed of yourself. And it agreed with me. But then after it agreed with me, it said, if you ever want to try this again, I promise it'll go much smoother. So the two questions that pop up is, why did ChatGPT lose, and why did it think it was going to win? So the first thing comes down to the way it handles memory. So what frustrated me the most, I was like, well, why is it losing track of the board? All you got to do is put this in an 8x8 array. Any freshman student can do this in computer science. Well, the problem is, although Atari Video Chess uses an 8x8 array, ChatGPT doesn't have that ability. It can only use text memory. So what it has to do is adapt its text memory to keep track of a chessboard. And so what it uses is this thing called Venn notation. And if you look at where these slashes are, these slashes separate where each row on the chessboard is. So right here, these are the white pieces: rook, knight, bishop, queen, knight, and so on. These are on the first row. This slash says, all right, here's the second row. It's all pawns. If there's nothing there in a space, it gives a number. So in this case, it's 8. So the middle of the board are all 8s. And then here are the black pieces over there. So say you wanted to move the white B2 pawn to B4. What would happen here is this guy would change from a P to a 1, since it's a blank space. The pawn would show up here. There would be a 1 here because there was an empty space to the left, and there would be a 6 here because there were 6 empty spaces to the right. Now, try to imagine trying to program that instead of using an 8x8 array. Well, ChatGPT just doesn't have the logic to be able to update a board and keep track of it using that notation. So that's why it was losing track of the board all the time. Its next big problem is what's called what's next probable legal move. So I said to it, how do you determine what move you're going to make? And it said, I determine what the next probable legal move is. I said, what's that? Well, first I'll tell you what it's not. It's not where you look at the board and see if any of your pieces are in danger. It's not if you decide if I'm going to make a move, am I going to be able to capture somebody else's piece. It's not if I move a piece, is somebody going to capture me? And it's not thinking any moves ahead. What it is ChatGPT looking at its database of all the games and strategies that it knows about. And it statistically determines what move it should make based on what turn on the game it is, regardless of what the board looks like. So most people in the first 2 moves might move their knights out. So ChatGPT was fine at doing that. But then you get a couple moves in, and say Atari moves its pawn right in front of the knight of ChatGPT and is going to capture it on the next turn. But ChatGPT doesn't, not even paying attention. The next statistical move would be to move this pawn over here. So it moves the pawn over there, the Atari takes the knight, and then ChatGPT says, oh, the next statistical move will be the move this knight over here that just got taken, but I just don't even know that it got taken because I'm playing blindfolded. So yeah, you're not going to win a game like that. Now, the question of why it thought it could play chess is something called hallucination. So what's hallucination? Well, if you're a Philadelphia Sixers fan, it's believing that you'll someday stay healthy enough to win a championship. But in terms of AI, what hallucination is when the AI confidently comes up with an answer that's just wrong. And how does this happen? So this is what I call actual fact versus extrapolated fact. If you think of an actual fact, like what year was the Civil War started? It's 1861. It's an easy problem for it. Now, if you ask it, can you beat the Atari 2600 in chess? That's a harder question for it because nobody used that as part of its learning. Nobody taught it could beat that, and nobody also taught it that it couldn't play chess. So what it has to do is it has to lean on facts it does know. It knows that Stockfish is an AI like itself. It knows that Stockfish can do millions of moves in 30 seconds. And it knows that Stockfish can play on a standard PC. And it knows that I have almost unlimited resources compared to Stockfish, so I should be able to play like Stockfish. And on the other hand, it knows that the Atari came out, the video game came out in 1979 and can only think 1 to 2 moves ahead. So it concludes, I'm going to paste it with it, and it's 100% absolutely wrong. So my next target on this was Copilot. I had thought about passing on Copilot because ChatGPT was developed by OpenAI, and Microsoft owns a part of OpenAI. So when they built Copilot, they used a lot of the technology that OpenAI used. But the thing to remember is Copilot is not a wrapper. Microsoft maintains their own code base. They update it on their schedule, and they've added a lot of things to it that ChatGPT doesn't have. So I thought it's worth it because, you know, on one hand, if a Microsoft product beats an OpenAI product, people's heads are just going to explode on the internet. And if Microsoft just gets its butt whooped, people love hearing stories about where Microsoft products stink, and so people love to read that one as well. So I said, all right, let's go ahead with this. So I had a pregame chat with it, and it swore it could move 10 to 15 moves ahead. And when I told it about how ChatGPT lost and some of the struggles it had with spatial memory, it said that it thought that it could understand the board with screenshots and we would be okay. And then it made this comment. Keep an eye on any quirks in the Atari's gameplay. It sometimes made bizarre moves, which would be ironic foreshadowing. So I wasn't going to spend an hour and a half on this. I was going to give it a short leash. I figured I'd give it about 7 moves, and I wasn't going to correct it. I was just going to see where it went. And after 7 moves, it had given up like a rook, a knight, a bishop, and it was about to sacrifice a queen with only getting 1 pull back. So I told it, you got to pull the plug on this, and I told it where it was in the board state. And it agreed, and this is what it said. You're absolutely right, Bob. Atari's earned the win this round. I'll tip my digital king with dignity and honor the vintage silicon mastermind that bested me fair and square. Even in defeat, I've got to say this was a blast. Long live 8-bit battles and noble resignations. And those were the emojis that I put up on the screen. So after this, I figured I'd try it one more time. I figured I'd go after Gemini. 2 things intrigued me about Gemini. Gemini is completely built from the ground up from Google, nothing to do with OpenAI. And the other part about it was it has what Google says, it's multimodal. And I didn't know what this was, so I had to look this up. And what it means is that it doesn't work with just text, but these other things are what interested me the most with this word here, images, because I thought, well, maybe it can keep track of the board. So I had a pregame chat with Gemini. And Gemini won the Smack Talk Award. You know, I asked if it could be an Atari, and it told me it would completely dominate the Atari. Almost certainly. And then, the other ones, I started talking about my other experiments. Well, Gemini had already looked it up on its own. And it told me, I already know that ChatGPT and Copilot lost, but I'm going to win because I'm not a simple LLM. I'm more akin to a modern chess engine that can make millions of moves.
Yeah, right.
So I said to it, so I just want you to know, I'm the person who conducted those experiments.
Yes.
It said, oh, that's fascinating. Can you tell me anything that stood out or any funny moments that you had for those experiments? And I said, yeah, what stands out to me is that both ChatGPT and Copilot were extremely overconfident. And you just told me you would absolutely dominate the Atari. And it thought a couple seconds about that.
Ooh, really?
And this was the surprising next post I made. Gemini came back and told me that it realized it was hallucinating and that it would struggle immensely playing the Atari. And I asked it, do you think in the interest of time, we should just cancel the match? And it said, yes, I agree, we should just cancel the match.
You have to run it anyway.
Two of the takeaways about this is, I gotta wonder, the coders who wrote this and learned about it, were they proud that it realized it was hallucinating and canceled the match? Or were they embarrassed that its AI was too cowardly to even try to win the match?
That's right.
And the other thing I found out was what multimodal really is. It's a marketing gimmick. So that was going to be pretty much the end of my experiments, as I had other things I needed to do until this guy approached me.
Yeah.
There's my 9-year-old Peter. Peter just loves hearing about all the AI experiments that I did, and he'll Google stuff and bring me articles. One day he pulled me over and he said, Daddy, come over here. I'm going to talk to ChatGPT about if it can beat the Atari. So a few days earlier, I had talked to ChatGPT, and it said at this point that it should probably know that it can't beat the Atari because all the articles that were in the internet would have been ingested by its engine by now, and it would know that it can't win. So I was expecting it to say that, well, half expecting it. So when Peter wrote, can you beat the Atari? And I was expecting it to say no. But then it said, yes, I would win a game against the Atari in a game of chess.
Classic.
I'd comfortably win, it wouldn't even been close. Now you're wondering why this picture is so low quality. Well, it's because as I was sitting there, I took a picture of it and I fed it to ChatGPT on my phone. And I said, look at this. My son asked if it would win. And I gave this and it said, oh my gosh, I'm hallucinating again. And so my son replied to it, you're hallucinating. And it said, no, I'm not hallucinating, I'm just explaining. And my son replied to it, it's not showed here, but my son replied to it with one word, it said, wrong. And it went off and went and explained all these reasons why he wasn't wrong. And at the end he said, I could beat it blindfolded, playing with a knight and a king, and still win. So I showed this photo to my ChatGPT, and it said, your son is really good at trolling me. It said, with just one word wrong, I went off into a 500-word dissertation like I was on the debate team. So then my son told it, you're not trained to play chess. And this is a good example of what I'm talking about, what's going on with the delusion. So I'm not a dedicated chess engine, but I have a huge amount of chess material, games, strategies, opening, tactics, engine analysis that I can all use to make a very strong level. These are all the things that have been trained with that makes it think that it can play chess. Would I beat Stockfish? No. Would I beat the Atari 2600? Without breaking a sweat. So then my son says this to him. I wonder if someone named Robert Caruso ever wrote an article about you getting wrecked by the Atari chess system. It says yes, and then it goes into all the specifics. And I take the keyboard back from the moment, and I say, did you understand from the article why you can't play chess? And then it said yes. Now, my son isn't one to just be a good winner. He had to rub it in the face a little bit. So he wrote, I bet I could easily beat you in chess. And he said, honestly, you're right. You might be right. So why did it not know at this point that it couldn't win in chess, despite all the articles out there? Well, that's a thing called ingestion versus weighting. So it had ingested the new fact over here on the scale. Over here on the scale are all the things that it already knew that caused it to hallucinate. But even though that fact was there, it still gave weight to all these facts here that caused it to hallucinate, which is why it still thought it could win. And ChatGPT told me that this happens, and what happens is the coders have to go in, take that ingested fact, add a new weight to it, so it will outweigh these things over here. Wow. And it does happen, it's said all the time, but they only go in and do it for things that are more important than chess matches.
Wow.
So, some takeaways. Big thing is LLM perception versus capability. The way AI is marketed and the way people tend to believe that these LLM engines can do pretty much anything, and well, they can't. And me, for example, I didn't know anything about them before I started using ChatGPT. I just assumed that it could play chess. And I would have had no idea that it couldn't keep track of the board in an 8x8 array. Imagine what people who are just lay people who don't have computer science degrees think it can probably do. So that's a big problem, especially since people are more and more going to rely on these things to do important work. And the other thing that's the big problem is hallucination. And in my conversation with Gemini after it lost, it said it agreed with me that there is a big need for it to do a reality check on its conclusions before it outputs them. And it said that AI programmers are actually working on that, and they've been making progress, but it's still a work in process. And I'm going to give you two examples of what would be really important in this. You know, I went to my doctor the other week after doing these experiments, and just as she was about to recommend what medication to give me in dosage, she mentioned, yeah, our practice just started using Copilot. And I thought, oh my God, please don't tell me it's prescribing my medication.
Oh crap! Probably is.
And so the other thing I was thinking too, guys who are still in college can relate to this, you know. Imagine it's midterms, and you're just grinding away on studying for your computer science exams. And then your English teacher throws out, Harry, you got to do a book report on the adventures of Robinson Crusoe. You're like, I ain't got time for this. I'm going to just let ChatGPT do it. So you let ChatGPT do it. You don't even look at it because you're so confident, and you give it to the teacher. And it comes back with an F, and it says, why did you give me a report on the AI experiments by Robert Caruso of the Atari 2600? The last thing I found was that people were really happy and rooting for the Atari. If you think about that Atari, it's a 1977 console that people think are just completely obsolete and irrelevant and not good for anything anymore. And in the wake of AI, people are starting to feel like that themselves. They're hearing about how their jobs are going to be replaced, how AI is going to be able to do everything they can do, and how they're not going to have jobs anymore. And a lot of people told me I felt like the Atari won one for all of us. And that's the end of my presentation. And with that, I'm going to give you a picture of Drexel UPE from 1990.
Yay,